So uranium, when it comes out of the ground, is uranium ore, is a mixture of various uranium isotopes. And some of those isotopes are more or less useful for things like energy production or use of that uranium in nuclear weapons. So when the uranium comes out of the ground, it's about 0.7% uranium-235, and that's really the isotope that we want because that isotope breaks apart a lot easier than uranium-238, which there's a lot more of in the in natural uranium. So basically, to sustain a reaction, a chain reaction to produce energy, or at a larger scale to produce a nuclear weapon, to produce the explosion in a nuclear weapon, we want to increase the amount of uranium-235 isotope in that uranium mix. For a nuclear weapon, we're talking about closer to 90% uranium-235. And there's sort of applications in between that. So for instance, Iran's research reactor takes nuclear fuel that's enriched to about 20% uranium-235. Medical isotopes kind of take other percentages of uranium-235, but that's what enrichment is basically increasing the percentage of uranium-235, the fissile isotope that can sustain a chain reaction within the uranium. Centrifuges are, that's the equipment that one would use to enrich uranium. There are other methods for uranium enrichment, but that's the one that Iran was using. So basically, it's just a very long tube. In the case of Iran, I think it was aluminum that they were using. And basically, you put hundreds and hundreds of these tubes in what are called cascades. They're all interconnected between each other. You insert the uranium hexafluoride, so the gas form of the uranium that you're wanting to enrich. That centrifuge spins really, really, really fast, and it separates out uranium-235 from uranium-238. So bypassing that uranium hexafluoride through the cascades of centrifuges, that's how you start accumulating kind of greater percentages of uranium-235 in the output material. So it's the equipment you use for enrichment. So in practice, it would be quite a complicated operation that would take at least days, if not longer. I mean, first they'd have to figure out where that uranium actually is because we're not 100% sure where the material is or what state it's in, frankly. Then they would have to secure that material. Again, depending on what state it's in, they'd have to move it into some kind of containers that would be safe for transport of that uranium out of Iran. Um, Again, they might have to transport it by land. They might try to airlift it, but you're doing this in a war zone. So an already complicated operation would become quite dangerous. So enriched uranium is moved around the world every single day. We use enriched uranium to make fuel for nuclear reactors. So that material, we know how to move the material. And normally it's moved in quite large containers. They're specialized containers. And it's moved either by land, it can be moved by sea, but again, specialized containers, highly protected, specialized vehicles, be it ships or railway cars or trucks that are used to actually move this material. But again, they're kind of in large casks, essentially. Type 30B type 30B casks, I think they're called. But that's enriched uranium at, again, about 3 to 5% enriched uranium, which is what we would use for civil nuclear reactors. a very complicated process and a specialized process that we have figured out how to do well becomes even more complicated and frankly more dangerous when we're talking about highly enriched uranium. So uranium that's enriched to 20, 60%, which is what we're dealing with in Iran. That material has to be moved in much smaller containers because of the concentration of uranium-235 in it. You run a much higher risk of criticality, essentially an explosion of that material, which would not be the same as a nuclear weapon explosion, just to make that clear, but again, is still a concern. So that material would be moved in much smaller containers. It would have to be packed in a way that would prevent it from kind of shaking around and bumping into each other. So we would be padded presumably with something. It would have to be packed in a way that prevents water droplets rather, from getting into those casks. So again, you'd kind of seal it with something, you'd surround it with some kind of material to absorb any water droplets in the air. So again, a very specialized, complex process that we know how to do, and the US will know how to do. But it's not a simple kind of throw it on the back of a truck and move it situation.
So good afternoon, welcome to this.
Or comparable in any way to what we saw.
So we know what levels Iran was enriching to and how much they had been accumulating based on the International Atomic Energy Agency's reporting. So the IAEA is, if you will, kind of the international nuclear watchdog. It maintains visibility of countries' nuclear programs, including Iran's nuclear program. So the International Atomic Energy Agency had at various times varying degrees of access, but had quite good access to Iran's nuclear program. Certainly before 2021, I think it was, when Iran started rolling back that access, it was a lot more comprehensive under the JCPOA, and immediately following kind of the US withdrawal of the JCPOA. Iran eventually started rolling back the IAEA's access to its various facilities, so we did lose some visibility. There have been efforts since the early 2000s to cap Iran's ability to produce enriched uranium. And then once Iran actually started producing enriched uranium again in the early 2000s, there were efforts to roll back or cap, let's say, the stockpiles that Iran was accumulating, the levels to which it was enriching. So really the heart of the JCPOA, the 2015 deal, was focused on limiting both Iran's actual existing stocks of enriched uranium and the levels to which it was enriched, but also its capacity to continue enriching uranium and to do that efficiently. So there were caps on the numbers and the types of centrifuges that Iran was allowed to have.